Penn State has a pretty loaded class for this 2026 cycle, but that doesn't mean that they're finished. No, it is now time to flip some prospects.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football recruiting, and as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. My name is Zach Seyko, and I am your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Well, now it's time to flip some prospects for Penn State. 25 commitments in this 2026 cycle, but Penn State is not finished. They are going to push for some prospects that are currently committed to other programs, names that you need to know how likely they will flip, including a couple of long shots that maybe Penn State has a better chance than more people will give them credit for. We're also going to talk about the needs that are still a part of this class, how this 2026 class will look at the end. Do they fall outside of the top 20? I see that concern pop up quite a bit lately. Let's begin with the flip targets, the names that most people are going to recognize here. I do want to begin with prospects that Penn State really was in good standing with, but ultimately didn't make the cut initially here. Carter Meadows and Dorian Barney, they're in the same group because, well, one, they're committed to Michigan, but two, Penn State was very much high on their list. I will say this, I do wonder if Penn State has a legitimate shot, because I will talk about Joey O'Brien and Kari Adams and Grayson McKeogh as well on this list, but Carter Meadows and particularly Dorian Barney, Penn State made a really good push with Dorian Barney, but things changed. Maybe there were some NIL factors with Michigan there. Hey, Barney's from Erie, Pennsylvania. I still think Penn State needs at least one more. It's more of a one, I guess, at this point, because they have 6 defensive backs in total. But if you can get that true elite playmaker, you missed out on Joey O'Brien, you missed out on Kari Adams. Dorian Barney was certainly not a consolation commitment by any means if they were to get that. They valued him just as much as some of those other high-end defensive backs there. Dorian Barney, I thought that one was Texas A&M and Penn State. It ended up being Michigan. I do wonder if this is Penn State's most likely player prospect that they're pursuing to flip in this cycle. I wouldn't completely rule out Carter Meadows. Well, I do see that one as maybe more so unlikely, but his teammates with Tyson Harley, Carter Meadows certainly had Penn State high up on his list. It is closer to home. That one, I do think, I've got to admit, it's going to be tough to pull those off, but in terms of likelihood, I don't think Barney's impossible, and I don't think Meadows is out of the question either, even though I do think the Wolverines will probably be able to keep them committed. Now, some other names. These are Pennsylvania prospects that, oddly enough, are all committed to Rutgers. Elias Coke, wide receiver, Rutgers commit. Seemed like a strong Penn State lean for quite some time. Wydeek Collier, 4-star defensive end. Seemed like a strong Penn State lean, ended up committing to Rutgers. And then Tavian Branch. Let's talk about these 3 prospects in particular, because all 3 of them seem to be projected, or at least understood that, hey, Penn State's going to land them. But Rutgers actually did win those recruitments head-to-head against the Nittany Lions. I don't want to say that's entirely NIL related. I do think, just listening to reports about it, that Rutgers did genuinely win those recruitments. They won them fair and square. But Penn State would take a 4th wide receiver, Elias Coke, out of the Harrisburg area, teammates with Kevin Brown. Tavian Branch, there was a discrepancy with his recruiting. Was he an offensive lineman? Was he a defensive lineman? I think Penn State wanted to take him as an offensive lineman. He wants to be a defensive tackle. If Penn State does happen to miss on another defensive tackle target, then maybe Tavian Branch becomes a little more realistic there. Again, it's if Penn State really does want to push for them. Penn State, would they want to push for Elias Coke as the fourth wide receiver? Would they want to push for Tavian Branch if they can either A, convince them that maybe he's an offensive line prospect, or B, take him as that defensive tackle, and then Wydeek Collier as well? This is kind of that wait and see. If they have a strong start to their senior season, Penn State is absolutely going to push here to see if they can flip them. These are the more realistic prospects because they're Pennsylvania natives first and foremost. Rutgers, that's a school that you should be winning recruitments against. It's just the way it is. And these were all strong Penn State leans for the most part until, hey, Rutgers won the battle here for all three of them. I could see maybe, depending on how their senior seasons go, because like I said, Penn State is loaded up, but potentially one of these three would make a lot of sense. Which one of those three will be tough to tell at the end of the day. Now, I'm going to get to that long shot player, but here are a couple other long shot prospects that I genuinely don't think Penn State has any chance for. I already mentioned Joey O'Brien, Grayson McKeogh, Kari Adams, all committed to Notre Dame, probably locked in. I don't think they're flipping from the Fighting Irish to Penn State. Same goes for Iheanacho as well. That has to do with NIL. I don't think that Penn State, and this is where it's going to be tougher to flip down the road because these agreements are going to be set in stone. There's going to be a lot of legal issues if you back out. Now, I know we're seeing a couple flips here and there, but as we continue to settle in this new era of NIL with the House settlement, it is going to be very much tougher to flip a prospect once their name is signed on the dotted line because there is now a financial commitment above all else. I don't think Penn State's going to they're not going to outbid Oregon in NIL anytime soon here. Iheanacho is probably going to stay with the Ducks in this case. Now let's talk about the player that I think could have a chance to flip to Penn State. At least Penn State should have more credit in this battle here, and that's Zion Elee. Zion Elee, 5-star defensive end, committed to Maryland. It really has to do with the fact that Maryland, they're just, I don't know how much longer Mike Locksley has with the Terrapins. If he already seemed kind of like a, flaky commit as it was, taking other visits to schools, even though he said his recruitment was shut down. If Maryland does well, then it's not going to happen. But I think we're all expecting the same thing, that this might be Mike Locksley's final season. How good are the Terrapins actually? I do think Penn State has a better chance than people might give them credit for. But at the same time, I do see him probably going to the SEC. Taking visits to Auburn, again, when his recruitment was shut down, that's probably the school that he would end up at. I'm just saying that Penn State has a better chance and could maybe make a push there if he does back out of his commitment with Maryland, if there's a coaching change earlier than expected, that kind of thing. So Zion Elee is the one player that's truly a long shot, and I think Penn State has a respectable chance, but I would not be shocked, and nobody else should be shocked if he ends up choosing an SEC school if he were to happen to decommit from Maryland. Now, Penn State, there is still another uncommitted prospect out there. There are needs in this class if Penn State were to address them with the right prospects down the stretch here. How does this 2026 class look overall? We're also going to talk more about where they will finish in these rankings, plus the latest commitments with Tyson, Harley, and Marlen Bright. That is all coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by Gametime. You got to download the Gametime app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Have you decided at the last minute that you want to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and suddenly you realize that you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without all of the stress. And with the money you save on tickets, you can use that for food, drinks, merchandise, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes it all possible. Gametime makes buying tickets fast and simple. And get this, prices on the app actually go down. They drop closer as you get closer to first pitch. They've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying tickets. So If you want to get tickets to Major League Baseball games, WNBA, any of your favorite summer sports, if you want to get tickets to Penn State football games in advance, you can as well. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEG, Locked On College for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Penn State's definitely looking to add another defensive lineman, which, like I said, intrigues me about the possibility of a Tavian Branch flipping away from Rutgers if Penn State's willing to take him as a defensive line prospect. But Carter Gooden is still out there. Gooden, it's between Penn State and UCLA right now. And that recruitment could take a turn rather quickly if Gooden's ready to make a decision. Now, here's the issue, is that UCLA wants him as a defensive end. Penn State wanted him initially as a defensive tackle, but then, hey, defensive end is now on the table there. They just want to take him as a defensive line prospect. UCLA, it's not going to beat the distance factor. This is the top prospect in the state of Massachusetts. 24/7 is very high on Carter Gooden as a defensive line prospect. The competition is questionable, but the athleticism, the potential, the measurables that he has makes him an intriguing prospect. I think that's Penn State. I know that do not discount UCLA. Let me say that. I am not overlooking the Bruins in this case because Deshaun Foster is settling in. UCLA at least has respectable NIL in this case, so they're not going to be pushed around by other top schools. And like I said, Penn State isn't broke, but certainly they have other bills to pay at this point with when you factor in, okay, needs for recruiting and everything else. Gooden could end up at Penn State. I do think this is a 50-50 battle between UCLA and Penn State, but defensive line, they're looking for either just a phenomenal prospect, but I think defensive tackle is another player. You want to get at least one more defensive tackle if you're Penn State. Everywhere else seems pretty much set across the board. These are mostly wants because Penn State has 25 players committed in total. You did lose Peyton Falzone. You had 2 quarterbacks committed in this class of 2026. The reason I can't say that quarterback is a need because you're not going to be able to flip a quarterback in this cycle and convince them that to be the second QB after Troy Hume. You kind of got lucky as it was with Peyton Falzone, but Auburn made that pitch and said, do you really want to be the second quarterback? How about some NIL to go with it too? And that's how that happened. You're not going to be able to convince any other QBs to do that now. Getting 2 quarterbacks was always difficult as it was. Kudos to Penn State for trying, and they miss out on Falzone. QB, I think taking a second QB is worthwhile for Penn State. If you can push for one, absolutely, but you don't just take a commitment to take a commitment. Scholarships can be used, for priority prospects. If a QB happens to emerge, somebody that is a late riser, Penn State would absolutely do it. So that's, again, I'm just kind of circling needs, prospects that Penn State or positions that Penn State would want in this class of 2026 if the opportunity presents itself. A 4th wide receiver is not out of the question. They wanted somebody like a Travis Johnson who ended up committing to Michigan. And that's probably another player that should be on a flip watch, but I don't know how serious that, like I said, with Carter Meadows or some of these other prospects like a Dorian Barney, Penn State really stood out for those individuals. I'm not entirely sure the same thing can be said for a Travis Johnson, but a 4th wide receiver for Penn State, if the opportunity is there, they will take one. They're loaded up at defensive back. They're loaded up at linebacker. They have 3 linebacker commits. They run a 4-2-5. I think they're set there. 6 defensive back commits. They will take the player, though. Dorian Barney's a defensive back. They will take a 7th DB, but not just a player to get the number of commitments up. You're not going to do that if you're Penn State. So you're in a high leverage situation with what you have at wide receiver, at defensive back. I think defensive tackle is you just need more defensive tackles, especially in the Big Ten. Offensive line, they have 5 players. There's your group. There's your 5 offensive linemen for this cycle. Tight end, they ended up getting Pierce Peterson, remember, as a late addition here out of the state of Minnesota. Tight end was definitely not a need, especially since you had 3 commit in the class of 2025. Running back, Messiah Mickens is in the fold. I know that Brian Bonner was somebody that they were going to at least potentially push for, but he's not a need. Running back is not a need because of what you were able to, even with Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen moving on. You have Corey Smith, Quentin Martin, Cam Wallace. I can keep going on and on. Jabri Wallace-Coleman just joined the team as a late addition from the class of 2025. Penn State's in great standing at the running back spot. Keemon Spell in 2027, but don't overlook Messiah Mickens in 2026. That's just a loaded running back room in terms of depth. Bonner would be an exceptional addition, but he's not a necessity, or any running back is a necessity at this point in time. So I would circle defensive line, wide receiver, quarterback, if the deck would break in your favor. 2026 class checked a lot of boxes here. It would be mostly wants for Penn State in this case, aside from a talent. You can always upgrade. You can always better your best. You can upgrade your talent. Are they going to fall outside of the top 20? That's the question that most people are asking here. Because, yeah, has it been a disappointing cycle, losing those battles to Notre Dame and Michigan respectively? This is still a good class. It's a really good class. But what is the risk that they fall outside of the top 20? We'll explain, plus talk about a couple of these recent commitments here with Tyson, Harley, and Marlen Bright, and what to like about them. That is on the way here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Will Penn State fall out of the top 20 when it comes to the team recruiting rankings? It is a possibility, I would say. It's definitely on the table, but I don't think it happens. I think they stay within the top 20. They might even be able to stay within the top 15 here. The thing to look at is the average for prospects. What is the average rating for prospects? Because Penn State has 25 commitments. I don't think we'll see any flips away from Penn State. I don't think we'll see any decommitments either. A lot of these players, I mean, Peyton Falzone caught us off guard, but I don't think we're going to see any more of that anytime soon, at least for the 2026 class, right? And 2027 is off to a phenomenal start with 2 players shutting down their commitments as it is. So that's where Penn State's focus is going to go, is to continue to start to build out 2027. But 2026, you focus on making some additions, making some flips. And if you do that, you can finish within the top 15 pretty easily. I don't think top 20 is that much of a concern. Is it a possibility? Sure, but it's not a concern of mine. Players are also going to see a recruiting bump. They're going to see a bump in the recruiting rankings. Kevin Brown is eventually going to be a 5-star prospect. I think Jasir Rogers will continue to see his recruiting ranking go up. Player like Terry Wiggins, and it's not out of the question that Marlen Bright, Tyson, Harley continue to see they just committed. Their rankings could absolutely go up. Their player rating could be increased here. There are a lot of underrated prospects at this point in time. I can continue to go on. Amari Polidor, Jaziel Hart, 2 defensive backs committed to Penn State. Daryl Carey out of Maryland, free safety committed to Penn State. Those guys easily could all see a boost in the recruiting rankings. So that's why I'm confident that Penn State doesn't fall out of the top 20. I think that is a very worst case scenario. You have 25 prospects committed. A lot of them are underrated, and you're not going to see any decommitments, and you're more likely to see additions than subtractions here, either 1 or 2 late flips or a late riser in these recruiting rankings to go along with this 2026 class. I think they might be 16th. I think that's the worst case scenario, is that they're 16th or 17th. Probably around that 14 to 16 range, which is top 15 in short here. Let's get to Tyson, Harley, and Marlen Bright. In case you missed either of their commitments, I encourage you to go check out my recaps for both of the commitments individually, and also talk about the position outlook for both offensive line and defensive line. Tyson Harley, 4-star defensive end. He is the latest commitment at this point in time, since he did commit after Bright. 4-star defensive end, and I said this in that recap. He's teammates with Carter Meadows, right? And you would think Carter Meadows is the 5-star. Everybody was going after him. Ohio State, Michigan ended up landing his commitment. But when you watch the tape, Tyson Harley is just as productive as Meadows. Does Meadows have better measurables? Is he faster? Sure. Yes. Does he have a higher ceiling at this point in time? Probably. But Tyson Harley, I made the comparison of Batman and Robin. It's not that clear. There are plays where Harley's doing a lot of the heavy lifting and makes the play. And Carter Meadows comes in with cleanup duty. Sometimes it's the other way around, but there wasn't a noticeable difference. Sure, Carter Meadows certainly stands out because of those measurables, but in terms of production, Tyson Harley is comparable right now at the high school level to Carter Meadows with what they bring. And I just want to point that out again. It is a nightmare if you're a high school quarterback, if you're a high school team preparing for this Gonzaga team. With Carter Meadows on one side and Tyson Harley on the other, that is insane at this level right now at this given moment. 2 Big Ten commitments at each defensive end. All I got to say is good luck, and wouldn't shock me if we find out at the end of the season that Gonzaga wins a prep title or whatever have you, a state title, or I guess DC is not a state, so some sort of conference title at the end of the day. And then Marlen Bright. 3-star, not quite a consensus 4-star. He's a 4-star per on 3. He's an industry 3-star offensive tackle. This was a priority for Penn State. 6'7". You can't teach size. He's listed at 6'7", 280 pounds. On 3 has him as a top 225 player overall. This guy, kind of like some of his other counterparts here at offensive line, Jack Fuchs in particular, where he's just a mauler in the run game. He's able to push people out of the way, extremely adept in run blocking. And I don't think he's too far off in pass protection thus far. I think he has promising footwork. So the attributes are there. This is another high upside player that, you do have raw potential here. I do think right now that the athleticism is a little lacking at this point in time because he does move well for somebody that's 6'7". However, it does take him some time. It takes some time to build some momentum, to build some speed. The strength is there. The footwork is there. The acceleration, the overall speed. At this point in time, you do want to see him improve that. But both of these players will definitely redshirt. And then I think for Bright, year 3, both of them, because Penn State doesn't need them to play right away. If they're willing to go through that developmental process, the transfer portal is there. But if they stick around and go through the full developmental process, hey, Marlen Bright and Tyson Harley as starters in year 3 or serious contributors is not out of the question. Definitely not out of the question. Marlen Bright, also something worth pointing out, took 12 visits to Penn State. I don't know why this recruitment took as long as it did. It wasn't even close. He took 12 visits to Happy Valley. Why it took to the middle of July to get him committed, who knows at the end of the day? But Penn State got him. He definitely wanted to be at Penn State. So that's the 2026 class relatively in a nutshell here, as Penn State will now try to flip players. Watch out, be on the lookout for Carter Gooden as that one uncommitted prospect that Penn State is seriously recruiting. And then it's going to get into the fall season, and that's where Penn State is going to look to add a couple more prospects to really finish this 2026 group. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Appreciate each and every one of you for checking out this show. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. As always, thank you to the everydayers for making us a part of your regular routine by being subscribed to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. And be on the lookout for more episodes surrounding all your favorite Penn State sports teams, whether it comes to recruiting, football, basketball, wrestling, you name it. It is all right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.